Hello and welcome to another episode of the Silk and Steel podcast. I'm your host, Carl Zha. Today, I have a very special guest to my show. He is known as Han Fei-Zi, a prolific writer at Asia Times who write about China, about Western perception of China, and Chinese interaction with the wider world. But for the people who are in the know, he also have another internet persona, aka Doggy on X. But Doggy is dead. Doggy just recently died.
Yes, Doggy he was misbehaving a little bit too much.
So now
it's respawned.
It's a Blue Bear, right?
It's respawned as Blue Bear. Yeah, so Blue Bear's somewhere around here. Oh, Blue Bear's here.
I have to say, I mean, I love your writing. I love your writing as Han Fei-Zi on Asia Times, but I love even better your X persona, Doggy, aka Blue Bear.
Yeah, Doggy is he gets to misbehave more. Han Fei-Zi must be the gentleman scholar.
Yes. So we, from your accent, you are obviously Chinese American.
Yep.
And my phone just my camera just decided to shut itself off. Okay. And so what would you like to talk about? I mean, there's so many topics we can pick on, because I think right now United States and on the broader sense the Western elite have what I call the China derangement syndrome. They always go China, 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 and they will blame China on everything. I recently saw a ridiculous article that says, it was China's fault. It's China's fault that draw the China's weakness that lure United States into the war with Iran. Which is completely nonsense.
Yes, that's Han Fei-Zi writes about a lot of stuff. But one kind of theme, many themes, but one theme that I think it's a real way the world runs, the world economy of the world runs, but economists in the West have completely rejected classical economics. Whereas actually China is operating under classical economics. So this whole economy of the world that we had been dealing with for the past, 30, 40 years since Nixon went off the gold standard in the 70s, was this weird Lucas paradox economy where poorer economies were lending money to rich customers to buy their wares. So everybody talks about the Asian miracle, Japan miracle, Korea miracle, and then China was the big one that stepped in. And it was supposed to be, these Asian countries, took advantage of this system and became rich. That is, to me, so far off the mark. What these Asian countries did was they did the only development path available to them because of the Lucas paradox, where capital flows from poor to rich. The only thing you could do was tighten your belts, save as much as you can, lend out your money to rich customers, and make revenues and collect capital as retained earnings, little by excruciating, bit by excruciating bit over decades. So you had decades of sweatshop economies in Asia, before you little by little climb up the technology ladder, and then over a period of decades, you find Asia where it is.
Is this because they have to accumulate the capital? I mean, the whole Lucas paradox is, supposedly the capital should flow from rich country to the poor country, right? So from the capital should flow from where there's a plentiful of capital flow to the capital. There's much demand for it. That's a classical economics, Adam Smith, etc. But Lucas paradox is maybe we need to break it down for my audience who may not be trained economics, may not be trained economists.
So So the Lucas paradox, it should be capital flows from rich to poor, where the rich countries already have their companies, they're already making money, and then all the low-hanging fruit has been picked, and therefore additional capital will tend to, if all the laws of economics are correct, will tend to flow from rich country to a poor country, or to a poor or lesser developed country. And that worked for a while when England, when the Great Britain invested a lot in the US in the 1800s, and then it stopped working in the 1970s after the US went off the gold standard. So there are many reasons why it stopped working, but one of the major ones is the rich countries, especially the US, Canada, Australia, they started to trade assets for goods. So the big globalization trade since the 1970s is one big assets for good trade. And it's legitimate. You can't say it's not legitimate. What it is countries that have an extra, a preponderance of assets. The whole U.S. is one giant fat bird of a country, 2 coasts, lots of real estate, lots of companies that are worth a lot. You got, the treasury bills are worth a lot. The great credit for the U.S. government. So it became a assets for good trade. So in the past 30, 40, 50 years, this assets for good trade is what globalization has been. Except now we have run into the situation where the Lucas paradox is finally reversing itself. It's not reversing itself because all of a sudden the US, UK, and all these rich countries are suddenly investing in the global south. No, it's reversing itself because China became rich. China is now becoming that rich economy that gets to invest in poorer economies, which it is doing and trying to do as much as it can. So when you look at like last year, everybody flipped out because China's trade surplus was 1.2 trillion. And then, oh my God, it's taking all the markets. Well, first of all, that 1.2 trillion, the exports to the US has topped out like about 4 or 5 years ago, and has been stagnant or even going down. Exports to Europe has also more or less been plateaued for 4 or 5 years. All the growth from China, all the export growth from China, is export growth to the global south. And that's exactly what it should be, because that is China lending money to the global south in Belt and Road, BRI loans, and then that money is used to buy Chinese capital goods. And the biggest thing last year was solar panels. Solar panel exports to Africa, to Pakistan, to keep all over the world, South America, just went through the roof. And then the BRI engagement last year was double its records. A lot of people said BRI is dead. That was a theme for about 2 or 3 years. But actually, it was just chugging along, had a little lull for COVID, and it had a record year in 2004 and 2024. In 2025, it had a new record, which is double the 2024 record. So it's mostly energy products, energy infrastructure. So finally, the world can run on a real economy. And the real economy is you have some rich country, namely China, will be exporting capital goods to poorer countries to build up their infrastructure so that they can be really participate in the global market. And then how it's financed? Well, it's financed by China. It's financed by capital outflows from China. So
now,
go ahead.
Let me pretend I'm a China watcher. I'll give the China watcher's argument. How is what China doing different from, say, IMF and World Bank? How is that different from the Western exploitation of the global South? Isn't that just neo-colonialism?
One, China just has more money. So World Bank and IMF, it just doesn't have that much, and mostly because the Western economies run huge current account deficits. So if you're running a huge current account deficit by math, you need to suck in capital from the world. So all these loans that come from the IMF, the World Bank, it's just window dressing. Mathematically speaking, the West cannot, by math, because they run current account deficits, invest in the global South. That's just a mathematical identity. So one is that the IMF and the World Bank just don't have that much money to invest, to lend out. And two, they just lend out money, and most of it in the past has been healthcare, some education projects, or to shore up a company's failing debt. It's already gotten into emergency, and then the IMF will step in. Whereas China, the loans are given out to build something. And the something could be roads, dams, railroads, solar power projects, electricity grids. So that's the key difference.
Now, traditionally, the Western countries, their involvement in the global South, particularly in Africa and Latin America, mostly in extraction, right? And there's I remember seeing like a mean graph where like Africa is basically a hole being dug, and all the gold get transferred to France, right? Which actually happens because like they have this system called the Central African francs that's actually the currency being used in the former French colonies, and all the reserve in gold is actually held in France. Now, but now again, I'm playing devil's advocate. What is China's what's China doing that's different? How is China different from all these European countries that have been practicing these
China
colonialism?
So China, it is trying to get African resources as well. So let's not beat around the bush. Africa, a lot of these developing economies, global South, that's all they have to trade at this moment, because they have not yet built up the education system. They are not yet industrialized. They don't have the infrastructure in place to have any kind of other economy besides resource extraction. So what the old development model is, and I used to be an aid worker in Africa, what the old development model is the rich countries will go into African country, or just, for example, and say, oh, you are totally corrupt in a basket case, and to industrialize your country will take $100 billion, which you do not have. So why don't we send some Peace Corps volunteer and do village handicraft projects and microcredit? All of that amounts to just window dressing and a whole lot of nothing. The new development model is China goes into one of these countries and says, oh, you're totally corrupt and you're a basket case. But because China's manufacturing is so efficient, it only costs you $50 billion to industrialize, to build out your roads, your infrastructure, your schools, and your hospitals. And at that amount of money, it doesn't matter how poorly you're governed, or it matters much less. And therefore, China will gladly lend you that money. So the idea is that the West never had any intentions of flooding Africa or the global South with capital. Not only that, the West needs capital. Its model is built on current account deficits, and then sucking in all of the petrodollars and also Asia's exports and export dollars. So it's actually, in the back of its head, it's fighting Africa for capital flows from petrostates and productive Asia. So
and we know that actually happens in practice, because a lot of African elite, they do stack their ill-gotten gains in like French or Swiss banks, and same with the whole petrodollar recycling back of the dollar surplus back into the U.S. Treasuries and U.S. real estate, U.S. stock market, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah. So when a Western country, they look at Africa and they say, let's try to develop it. They come up with this huge bill, because that's, let's say, for instance, $100 billion. And they say, you're too corrupt and you're too much of a basket case, so let's just do some window dressing Peace Corps volunteer microfinance, just these window dressing aid projects. China's Belt and Road is completely different. They look at it and they say, okay, we can cut that bill not $100 billion, we can cut that down to $50 billion. At $50 billion, okay, it can absorb a lot of mismanagement. So, at $50 billion, you can industrialize a lot of the global South. When that cost is half what it takes, the Western world to do. So, and because of that, and then because China runs huge current account surpluses, that's where that money comes from. Not only where that money comes from, but the whole, manufacturing and industrial economy of China can produce all those capital goods that the global South needs, from solar panels to dams and roads and railways and cars. Because the first 10, 20% of the cars on the road are capital goods. They are used for the businesses, that drive around to run the economy. Only if you get past, car penetration of 10, 20%, then it starts being consumer products.
Okay. I know a personal anecdotal story. I know somebody who just graduated fresh out of college in London, and he went into those Western aid project to teach Africans how to practice agriculture. I was very skeptical at some point. I'm like, the African has been doing agriculture for thousands of years. What do you, a fresh college grads, know anything about African agriculture that you have something useful to you?
So all of this is also a reason why the West, or the US especially, de-industrialized. Because since the 1970s, since Nixon took the US off the gold standard, this whole assets for goods trade that the US has been running on since Nixon went off the gold standard in the 70s has de-industrialized the US as well. Because what you have is all of the US, all of the upper middle class people, Wall Street to lawyers to consultants, real estate agents, their job essentially is to package US assets to trade for Asian goods. So, and all of their compensation is tied to the value of those assets. And those assets are valuable, not quite because people are highly skilled and made them, but because America is America. America is two great oceans, fruited plains from sea to shining sea. So what you have is the US has been running on a combination of Dutch disease and Bohmel's law. So Dutch disease is in the Netherlands when they discovered natural gas in the 1960s. Very quickly, all the capital went to the natural gas space, and they de-industrialized. Their currency went up, and the Netherlands, for like about a decade or so, had somewhat of a recession, even though they discovered natural gas. That's why they call it Dutch disease. Same thing with the U.S. Although it's not selling like one product, it's not selling one commodity like oil or natural gas. The U.S. is selling everything. The U.S. is, its whole economy is based on what you can package together, what you can securitize and sell. So already in the 1950s and 60s, almost all US companies was owned by Americans. Now, about a third of the stock market in the US is owned by foreigners. So little by little, the US is maintaining its high compensation, high consumption, high standard of living by selling down, little by little, over the years, its assets. So the only jobs, high-paying jobs that remain in the US are people who package these assets for sale, such as the Wall Street, big law firms, consulting companies, or you have people who are like Apple Computer, who maintain some little bit of the fun job, the design, the engineering in the U.S., and then all the sweaty brow, really hard work is outsourced to China or India or whatever. So, so this whole trade of that of the Lucas paradox, where and then it's China lending the U.S. money to buy these products, and the lending, then the assets wind up in China's hands in terms of treasuries or stocks or bonds or real estate. Americans live very well. Part of Americans who are in this, who get to trade these assets, and others are de-skilled. So you're pretty much trading, you want leisure. A lot of Americans want leisure. So, and they don't really want to work hard in a factory and be all sweaty broad, even though they claim they do. Reindustrialization will be really hard because it will require that the US stop this assets for goods trade. And once you stop this assets for goods trade, then compensation for tech bros and Wall Street and lawyers and consultants will start approaching the compensation level for, a process engineer in Zhengzhou.
But Han Fei-Zi, wait. The U.S. is rich and powerful is because U.S. possesses a special innovative spirits. It's always pushed the frontier of science and technology, whereas China, the Chinese, they're just bugmans who only thing they know how to do is grind and be strivers, right? This is what you read on social media nowadays. They say those Asian strivers, they just grind away like mindless bugmen or robots, and that's what they are designed to do. Whereas United States, we have possessed bountiful of talent, that innovative spirit, that magic that can make 0 to 1, the leap of 0 to 1.
Oh man!
Like you see that kind of talks very common on the social media. It's because America possesses a special magic, right?
Yeah, the special magic, if you really look down into it is not there anymore. In any metric you can think of, from college papers, university research, patents. China is multiple times, and then what you really find is that the real hard work is not the designer in Cupertino, California, that rounded the edges, the corners of the Apple iPhone. The real hard work are the process engineers in Zhengzhou who grind out those millions of iPhones a year. And you know that because of downward compatibility. In China, all those companies made their own phones sooner or later, as in Xiaomi's or Huawei's, Oppo's, Vivo's. And Apple cannot repeat the manufacturing process in the US. If it was such a low value add, anybody can do business and the lowest part of the smile curve, supposedly, then it should be very easy to replicate the manufacturing. But that's actually the hardest part to replicate is the manufacturing. That's exactly why it was outsourced, because of Dutch disease and Baumol's law, where because you're already making so much money selling stuff in the US by securitizing assets and selling it overseas, that you only keep the super fun, super high paid, something distorted jobs such as rounding out the corner of your iPhone and calling that great design. Elon Musk has brought this up multiple times, that design in a product is a rounding error of the engineering that goes into manufacturing. The real work is in manufacturing. So I used to be an engineer, and there's always professional tension between design engineers and manufacturing engineers. And the manufacturing engineers always win because there was downward compatibility. They can do the work of the design engineers, but the design engineers cannot do the work of the process engineers, of the manufacturing engineers. So ultimately, the process engineers, manufacturing made the call. Because if you can't make it, there's no point in having it designed.
But Han Fei-Zi, wait. But
okay,
see,
okay,
people,
I gotta stop you again because you're coming out.
Okay, Han Fei-Zi, wait. So the argument people make is that Americans, yes, we do the fun stuff, but we also do the 0 to 1 leap. The example is SpaceX, is Tesla, Elon Musk, and whereas people in East Asia, China, Korea, Japan, what do they get for all the grinding away? What they get is people are miserable. There's high depression, high suicide rate. Their birth rate is falling off the cliff. While Americans, we have the perfect work-life balance. We play hard and work hard too, right? Which I personally do not agree. I think Europe actually has much better work-life balance than the United States. But that is a prevalent take on the internet, on the American platform X particular, right? They say, okay, all those grinding Asian strivers, all they get is depression and birth rate falling off the cliff, while America is still humming along. Goldilocks.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot of truth to be said for that, because for Asia to climb up in the past, 3 or 4 decades, you've had 3 or 4 decades of tightening belts. But pretty much only Asia can do this. It's pretty much the only development model offered to Asia, because there was no capital flowing from so Asia did suffer all these years. But what you got out of it is you built up your capital base, you did get rich. And then what is happening in the West is they're living on borrowed time. The US is living on borrowed time, as in it's selling off its assets to live large today. Its debt is going up, and the more and more of its assets is held by foreigners because it has to. And the U.S. realizes as well, now you're de-industrialized. At some point, there's going to be nothing left.
So there's an argument. Yeah, there's an argument that China does one to many very well. They can scale quickly to commercialize a product, to commodify something, but they are not good at doing 0 to 1 to invent something completely new. They use like SpaceX, right? Elon Musk, he pioneered the whole thing, and Chinese, they just copy and copy. So the argument is that as long as United States maintain its innovative edge over China, you'll be fine.
Well, I mean, if they can do that, but what it has turned out is the U.S. is only ahead in a handful of industries, a handful of verticals. China is ahead in everything else, and the U.S. also has a very bad habit of thinking that it's the one that invented something, when in fact it was not. For example, people will say that Google invented, PageRank for search, but in fact, it was Robin Li whose RankDex Google quote unquote copied off of. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say they copied off of. I say they innovated on top of RankDex. Robin Li of Baidu actually beat them to it. People will say that Tesla, or Elon Musk, EVs, Teslas came to China and invented the EV industry in China, which is completely ridiculous, because by then China was already making 2.5 million EVs and Tesla was only making 200,000. It was going bankrupt. It came to China because only China could manufacture EVs. But the way it's dressed up in the press, it seems like it was Elon Musk who invented Chinese EV industry. But it was in fact China which rescued Tesla, and it's Chinese engineers trying to go through all of the rest of Tesla's factories all over the world to try to fix them, because the only one that's economical right now is Shanghai. So there's all these examples where the West will believe that invented something, when in fact the actual innovation, the actual thing that made it happen was in China. And you'll see more and more examples of this. DJI invented drones. all these things where the West will say, oh, batteries and electric vehicles and solar, they were all invented in the US. Well, no, they were not. Somebody in the US had this idea, a few decades ago, but the idea never got anywhere. Once the big boys showed up, they were only able to participate in the very beginning of the discussion. When the big boys showed up to make things work, they were cast aside. So it's if you keep thinking that you will be the one that will invent everything, well, if you can't hold on to it, if you can go 0 to 1, but you can't go from 1 to infinity, it doesn't really matter. So I kind of reject that just because there's too many examples where people in the West think they invented something when all they were doing it just fussing about.
Where does that leave the West? So where does that leave the United States? Where can it go from here?
Well, if you ask me, the U.S. should be a theme park. Have your Cowboys and your NASCAR, and your NBA and your NFL, and have great resorts. If you want to be, innovative, then you better learn your maths. Just look at the dire straits of American math and science education. They don't want it. I mean, if you ask me, they don't want to be at the forefront of technology. If they might say they want to be, but they don't.
People hate that. People hate that when you tell them they have to work harder. That's how what's his face? Rama. Who's that Indian American guy?
He brown gaffed. What's his name? Brown gaff is when a brown guy accidentally tells white people the truth, and he shuffled off the stage.
He killed his political career. He killed his whole political career after that speech when he told the white people to work harder. They're like, no, no, we want to deport your ass.
Right, and we can remain number one by playing football and eating cheeseburgers. I mean, come on, people. If the U.S. wants to remain a tech leader, and it won't be. It just cannot. It just cannot. Just because China is way too many people working too hard, graduating, almost 7 times as many engineers and computer science students per year as the U.S. And
but they're not having kids. They're not having kids. So in a couple of generations, all the Chinese will just die off. And they will just collapse. And America win by default.
It's all of the people, see, from now to the year 2050, between now and the year 2050, the number of STEM workforce, the size of STEM workforce in China will almost triple. All those people have already been born. So it's after that we got a problem. Now, after that we got a problem. It's a problem to be solved in 50 to 100 years. I don't know if I'm confident in any kind of forecast in 50 to 100 years. There is a huge drop in the birth rate from around 2016 till today. Part of it is due to just in that time, China China used to have 5% of the people, about 25 years ago, went on to university. Now it's about 70% go on to some form of higher education. About half of 70% go on to 4-year programs, another half go on to 2-year associate level programs. So all of that in the past few years, in the past decade or so, has delayed family formation. So I suspect some of those numbers, some of those births come back in the 5, 6 years, 5 to 10 years down the line. As you are seeing in South Korea already, last year South Korea had a tick up in its birth rate because South Korea was doing education maxing just like China, where everybody and their uncle was grabbed and shoved into universities and or graduate school. So, on that, it's a problem. It's a problem that 2050 50 and beyond that I'll start worrying about it.
That's fair. That's fair. Any other topic you'd like to cover?
The only other topic, which is way too huge, that could be for another call, is it probably will save this for another call or some other day, but because we already covered quite a bit today, is whenever we hear in the news, and the world's second largest economy, China, did XYZ. Let's wrap it up. It's the other topic that is always on my mind is whenever I hear people talk about the world's second largest economy, China, doing X, Y, and Z, I think that does all kinds of damage to the Western mind, because China has been lowballing its GDP for decades. It is not the second largest economy. It is not even close to being the second largest economy. On my calculations, China's economy on a real basis is 2 to 3 times that of the US. So it's already bigger. So Americans who are still living as if China's in second place, that's a dangerous place to be at. That's a really dangerous place to be at. And that is one reason why America hasn't taken China.
Okay, great. That was a great preview for our next topic of interest. But for people who want to follow you, Han Fei-Zi, where should they go?
Well, they can go to Asia Times and go under the author search Han Fei-Zi. You can follow Blue Bear, which is Blue Bear Monkey on X, because Doggy is dearly departed, then taken out and put down for misbehaving.
I for one highly recommend following the Blue Bear on X, because as much as I enjoy Han Fei-Zi's writing on Asia Times, I find the Blue Bear much more enjoyable personality to follow. Great fun.
It's an acquired taste. Some people don't quite like
it. Yeah, so thanks again for making the time to speak to us.
Yeah, thank you. And
despite our technical difficulties. Yeah, for sure. And everyone else tuning in, thank you for listening. Until next time. Bye-bye.